I'm just not even going to try getting time signals during your speeches because I was BS taught, but I'll do my best to get you time signals during cross-examination and leadership. In terms of my spare time, I really have like no preferences on like whatever arguments y'all want to run. This is my first round or public forum round judging on this topic, so I mean just bear that in mind. But you know, I competed in debate and LD and public forum and policy and nationals like all through high school. I've been judging since, you know, I've been graduated. And, you know, if you have any specific questions about like theory arguments or whatever, go ahead and ask. But I don't need to get into all that, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, all arguments go as long as they're backed by evidence and logic. Obviously, I have 3 years of debate experience from high school and 2 years of judging now. So,
I was a policy debater. I took fourth in state. I've been judging for about 20 years. So, I'd like to see a lot of personalization, line by line, and things like this. You do it, especially in the rebuttal speeches.
Did you debate here in Idaho?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Don't like to see a lot of speed.
All right, so bit of a technical question, I guess, for the official timekeeper here. When you get to the cross-examination period, and sometimes a team will ask a question at like 2 minutes and 58 seconds, if they finish the question before time runs out, should the other team respond to the question, even if it goes to like 3:04 or 3:06?
Just keep it short. Like,
right.
You know, don't, you know, and just as a general rule for cross-examination, like I just, you know, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth when you start getting like an expository answer.
Right, so don't give our fourth contention at the end of CX.
Yeah.
All right.
So we got one opinion on speed. How about the other 2?
I don't have a single problem with speed.
No problem with it.
And did we get the recording thing in writing?
Yeah.
We have it? Okay. All right. Whenever you guys are ready.
Is anybody not ready? Sweet. Okay, then I will begin. Resolved, the United States should withdraw its military presence from Okinawa. We reserve the right to define any major words later in the debate if need be. Resolutional analysis. Due to the resolve containing the word should, we need to look at the impact calc of today's overall debate. Meaning pro needs to provide that there are more benefits than harms brought up with withdrawing the military presence, and contra means that there are more harms to removing our military or more benefits to keeping it in Okinawa. Contention 1, Okinawa isn't a strategic stronghold. Subpoint A, look to other strategic placements. If dedicated sea lifts assessed through the stationing of an additional amphibious ready group, and the region becomes a companion opinion, contributes to the U.S. rebalance to Asia and defining contributions in terms of capabilities offered, with the capabilities explained and demonstrated to allies as part of a broader strategic communications effort. Subpoint B, NATO falls vulnerable in Eastern Europe. In numerous tabletop war games played over several months between 2014 and 2015, Russia's forces were knocking on the doors of the Estonian capital of Tallinn or the Latvian capital of Riga with a 36 to 60 hour time frame. U.S. and Baltic troops and American air power proved unable to halt the advance of the mechanized Russia. Units and suffered heavy casualties. The report by Rand Corp stated, NATO has been caught napping by a resurgent and unpredictable Russia who has begun to boost defense. It is clear that if Russia poses this threat, we cannot fall short again and must focus troops to the right areas. Contention 2, Japan needs to defend itself. Subpoint A, the United States can't afford to defend Japan. Many Japanese citizens are equally opposed to a larger military and more expansive foreign policy. Their feelings are understandable, given the horrors of World War II. However, the most fundamental duty of any national government is its defense. If the Japanese people want minimal military or none at all, that is their right, but in turn cannot expect other nations to fill that defense gap. Moreover, with a $1.6 trillion deficit this year alone, the United States can no longer afford to protect countries which are able to protect themselves. The key to regional defense lies in the cooperation between powerful nations like Japan, South Korea, and India, permitting a reduced U.S. presence in that region. And it seems like Japan has made moves to strengthen its defense position by permitting offensive operations. Subpoint B, Japan can devote more. Devoting only 1% of its GDP to defense has allowed Tokyo to create a potent self-defense force. Spending more would enable Japan to build a military well enough able to deter Chinese adventurism. Air Force Chief and Staff General Ronald Borgelman, sorry for that pronunciation, admitted that the Marines serve no military function and they don't need to be in Okinawa to meet any timeline in any war plan. Contention 3, withdrawing from Okinawa is the least we can do. Subpoint A, the U.S. occupies about a quarter of the Okinawan lands. In fact, just the sheer amount of space of our bases alone that it takes up causes massive amounts of problems for the Okinawan people. It is near impossible to develop any domestic or economic plans. It is harder for individuals to find land for business and houses, and traffic congestion is a constant. Subpoint B, natural resources harms. These military bases also block Okinawan access to natural resources, such as offshore lakes and even timber. These bases also cause environmental degradation because of the leveling and deforestation required to have them built. The pollution occurs not just from operations in the camp, but noise pollution is an all-time factor as well. One of the largest sources of revenue for Okinawa is tourism due to its natural beauty. However, military bases prevent more of this tourism, further stunting economic development. Subpoint C, we acquired the land through unethical means. The way the United States acquired the land was often through the use of deception and even outright coercion. In fact, we used bulldozers and bayonets to evict any unwilling residents, and the local Okinawans to this day are trying to recover from the land that the U.S. forced to take. And with that, I can only see a pro ballot.
Yeah.
Okay, so is anybody not ready for the con construct? Then I begin. We negate resolve, the United States should withdraw its military presence from Okinawa. Contention 1 is Chinese aggression. The Washington Post reported in 2016 that the new Chinese claims in the South China Sea would give China control over half of all global trade, and that similar claims in the East China Sea would put China in a position to blockade the Japanese Navy and prevent its Air Force from operating. Brahma Chelani reported last year that China has captured territory from the Philippines and has begun building man-made islands and military outposts in the region. Japanese news confirmed this when they reported that China has officially completed construction of an airbase on one of its man-made islands. Analyst at the Center for Strategic and International Studies Jenny Lin explains that Okinawa's unique position in the area makes it a strategically important location to East Asian conflict by allowing for significantly shorter response times in comparison to other U.S. military bases. Professor Leeds from Rice University states that when a nation-state has an ally committed to its defense, it is 28% less likely to be acted on aggressively. And as Martin Jacques of the London School of Economics wrote in 2009, decreasing American influence in East Asia would only serve to embolden and increase acts of Chinese aggression in the region. MIT analyst Okamoto Yukio confirms this by saying that when the U.S. withdrew from Vietnam, China annexed the Paracel Islands, and when the U.S. withdrew from the Philippines, China annexed the Mischief Reef. And she continues by stating that this trend would continue with a withdrawal from Okinawa. Contention 2 is nuclear proliferation. Subpoint A, Japan. Japanese Prime Minister Abe has continuously expanded the country's military since he was placed in office. Gavin Blair reported last year that the Japanese government has officially reinterpreted their pacifist constitution, returning the ability of the country to engage in offensive warfare. The Korea Times reported that the Japanese Diet amended the country's nuclear energy law to allow for the use of nuclear-powered national security purposes. They also report that Japan has advanced missile technology, over 30 tons of weapons-grade plutonium, and 1,400 kilograms of enriched uranium, enough to make 15,000 nuclear weapons. Government professor Christopher Lane writes that Japan has only begun its military buildup, and it is posturing towards nuclear proliferation because it fears the abandonment of U.S. defense forces in the face of Chinese or North Korean aggression. Christine Wormworth of the U.S. Department of Defense stated in 2014 that Japan would begin to push towards nuclear armament if the U.S. continues to reduce its defense spending or reduce its influence in the region. The presence of the U.S. military in Okinawa and throughout East Asia has kept the growth of Japan's military, as well as concerns from the country's neighbors, in check. Political science professor Louis Hayes states that existing security alliances between U.S. and Japan is seen as the greatest protection of Japanese security by their governments. The status quo allows Japan to reliably depend on American security assets. Hayes explains that the only way to further avoid a massive buildup of Japan's military is through continued reliance on the United States. Nene Kurashige reports in 2012 that the Japanese Defense Ministry views the U.S. military bases in Okinawa as vital to their country's national defense, and the Defense Ministry has officially stated that U.S. military presence in Okinawa is a lifeline for the country's security alliance. This is confirmed by Japanese defense scholar Professor Tomohiko Taniguchi, a key security advisor to the Prime Minister, who stated 5 months ago that the strategic value of the U.S. presence in Okinawa is at an all-time high in the face of Chinese expansionism in the region. If the United States were to withdraw from this strategically important island, which contains 75% of all U.S. military presence In Japan, it would only confirm the fears of the Japanese government and begin the country's proliferation of nuclear weaponry. Subpoint B is the domino effect. John Hafner of Yale University reported that if Japan were to develop nuclear weaponry, it would begin an East Asian arms race, spurring South Korea to begin their path towards nuclear weaponry, likely triggering responses from the other two nuclear powers in the region, China and North Korea. Donald Gross from the Center for Strategic and International Studies confirms this in 2012 by stating that South Korea would follow in Japan's nuclear path, not wishing to be in the middle of three dangerous nuclear powers. Hafner concludes that Japan obtaining nuclear weapons would be a signal to all other countries that the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was no longer in effect. Thank you all for your time. I urge a con ballot. And I'm ready for crossings.
Are the judges ready? Okay, do you mind if I take the first question?
Go for it.
Okay, can you give me one recent example of Chinese expansion and how the U.S.'s place is so important in
So a
South
recent
Asia?
example of Chinese expansion, we read you in case, Vietnam and the Philippines. When the United States left both of those places, not only did China take over some of the land for themselves, but they started building man-made islands there so that they can increase their military presence, and that brought harms to the environment. Can I ask you a question now?
Go for it.
Okay, so on the pro case, the very last point, the contention 3, the contention 3 subpoint B. You talk about how natural resources are harmed. You read off that the U.S. bases stop access to timber, but they also cause deforestation when they're built. Can you please explain how these two arguments can coexist for me?
Okay, so basically I can just let you read the card, but what we're saying is that
I'd like to see the card, yeah.
Okay, and for however much land that the Okinawan base is taking up is blocking off any natural resources, which is why many of the people disagree with having the base there.
But like if we're blocking timber and cutting down trees to build the bases, like...
Okay, you're cutting down trees to build a base, and now that the base is there, it's blocking the access to timber. It's two different separate things.
Okay, understood. Do you have a question for me now?
Okay, moving on to your contention to subpoint B, the domino effect. Where are you getting with this that staying in the Okinawa area is going to be helpful?
Well, the Okinawa area is helpful because it actually deters Chinese expansionism. We see that the Japanese only have increased their nuclear proliferation and increased their aggression, which you also read in case. They've only done this in response to the United States' threats to withdraw from Okinawa because they're afraid of Chinese and North Korean expansion.
Can I see the card where it's directly from the forces?
Yeah, my partner can grab that card for you. Mind if I ask a question in the interim?
Go for it.
Okay, so... Okay, you talk about the contention 1 subpoint B, how NATO vulnerability in Western Europe. What does this have to do with the, just explain the argument to me.
So basically what we're saying is if you're focusing troops that are in areas that aren't as important, we should focus them in areas where it's actually being harmful. So the fact that NATO's falling short for Russian areas is going to mean that we're going to need more forces there instead of somewhere that's less important.
Okay. Do you have a question for me?
Okay, moving on to your Chinese aggression, and you were saying that the airline bases were made on man-made islands. So what are you trying to get at with this argument?
Well, I'm just saying that China was taking over land in that area. China also uses the coral reefs essentially to build man-made islands. So we've actually seen evidence that Chinese military is expanding through taking over the Paracel Islands and Mischief Reef, which is what we read you in case.
And what's your evidence behind the fact that Okinawa is the only solvency for this?
Well, we tell you that if the United States were to withdraw from Okinawa, China would quickly move in to take the land. Japan would respond by over-militarizing and increasing their nuclear weapons.
Can I see the evidence that that's actually going to happen?
Yeah, we can grab that for you. We actually read four different professors and 2 defense analysts that tell you that Japanese nuclear proliferation is going to happen if Chinese expansionism can't be deterred by the United States.
Thank you. And then on your contention too, you were talking about Japan and the production of nuclear weapons. What was your number stated on those?
15,000 nuclear weapons is the potential that Japan could build.
Okay, and did you have any questions?
We're out of time.
So, was that the evidence you needed, or
Yes.
did you ask for something?
Okay.
All right, Judge ready? That's gonna bug me. Opponents? And Zach? Then I'll begin. So first and foremost, I'm gonna address their very first contention, which they talk about Chinese aggression. They argue the concept that basically they're building up this military force, and every time we've ever withdrawn a military force, such as in Okinawa, they somehow came in and filled up the vacuum is essentially what they're talking about. So basically what I want to address to you right now, and is what kind of question I want you to ask yourself, is why would China go in and openly attack with an invading army, their one and second largest, I guess, ultimately largest trading partner, when they know for a fact that Japan is allied with the United States, and an attack on Japan would suddenly lead to no more trade with the United States. In fact, if you guys want, look on every one of your shirts, I bet it says made in China. How exactly is the trade going to work there suddenly when you're declared war on their biggest ally? To say China's going to somehow invade is just simply flawed. And not just that, when we look into this military aggression, we have to realize what is the root cause of this military aggression? Why do they keep building up our army? For some reason, the United States has this concept that, don't worry, we'll put more troops here, and then they won't also put more troops there. And so if you look at all these countries, for instance, in Okinawa, areas like that, when they try to provide examples such as in the Philippines, where we left the islands, they immediately took it over. Why exactly did that happen? Because when we remove these troops, we simply place them somewhere else, such as the 50,000 troops in Okinawa right now. In fact, the Okinawans are even rioting for a brand new base to be built. And so essentially, by removing these troops, we're not reducing the threat that we pose, we're just strategically moving them around, basically like a giant chess game. And of course China's going to respond, of course China's going to try to play against us. If we're truly a hegemon and we control trade, why don't we approach this through a better means? For instance, we have control over tariffs against China. Why don't we approach it that way rather than saying, hey, if you do this, we'll use military action against you? Moving on to their second tension, they argue this concept of nuclear proliferation. But here's the main thing. If you actually look over here on the pro solves this much better. I want you to ask yourself, why would China need a nuke? Why would North Korea need a nuke? Unless they're trying to respond to some other kind of anger or preparing for some kind of war with another enemy that's basically presenting itself as an enemy. And not just that, but there's kind of some skewed ideas here we need to realize. For instance, we're just talking about Okinawan bases. We still have plenty of other bases that are existing in Japan. Japan isn't going to suddenly, I guess, start popping out nukes when we get rid of Okinawa, a very insignificant base. In fact, since we still have bases in Japan, we're still able to promote this nuclear, I guess we're still able to allow nuclear proliferation, and we're strictly talking about Okinawa here, which even according to our head general is a completely useless area with absolutely no military tactics. And just like a chess game, if you're going to keep playing the chess game, you have to constantly be moving. And so far, Okinawa is just another area we occupied during the island hopping times. And which leads me to another point I want to bring up. There's absolutely not a single threat in the to the United States that can't be addressed from even continental United States, let alone other islands where we also have bases, for instance, Guam, Hawaii, or even mainland Japan, or even South Korea. If you look to one of our fastest flying jets, the F-22 Raptor, it can actually fly around 1,500 miles per hour and get to pretty much anywhere in the world in underneath 30 minutes. So we really need to realize the concept that we don't need an Okinawan military base to address all these harms. And by having this base, we're increasing the militarism, basically constantly playing another Cold War battle. Now, if you look to this second tension, there's some kind of really historical event that we can directly link this to. Imagine the Cold War. What exactly led to this Cold War? My opponents are proposing, well, we'll leave this military force here and then we'll stop the Cold War from starting. I say, well, we just started a brand new Cold War by having the military base there in the first place. By constantly competing to grow militaries so you can basically get out better, we're allowing this Cold War to take place. By refusing to play the game, we're not allowing them to build their own military. Why would they keep wasting economic resources if they're not really, if we're not basically encouraging war altogether? Now, to further address another harm and impact that we're talking about is the concept of Eastern Europe. I know some of you may be wondering, how exactly did that tie in? Basically, if you look at it right now, even they fail to provide any example in which China has directly attacked Japan, China's directly attacked South Korea, or anything like that. But we can provide you a direct example just last year in which Russia attacked Latvia, or Russia attacked most of its border states, or even the Crimean invasion that's still going on. So why exactly are we worried about China, one of our largest trading partners, when we could be worried about Russia and having more troops stationed in Russia, which is more of a threat and has actual examples of violence being used immediately? All we're simply saying is maybe we should listen to our top military officials when they say, hey, Okinawa has absolutely no purpose, such as when our lieutenant general said so himself. Thank you.
Do you still need that evidence? Okay. I should be all right. Are our judges ready? My opponents? Yes. Partner? And my lovely audience. All right, with that, let's begin by going straight down the affirmatives flow. Let's start first with their resolutional analysis, which they tell you is the impact calculus in today's debate. We're going to concede to their framework, cross-apply it to our case. You're going to want to weigh overall impacts. Now, on to their contention one. They tell you that Okinawa is not a strategic location, but they never actually prove that fact. They tell you in their subpoint A that there are other areas which need U.S. military presence, but they never say Okinawa doesn't need U.S. military presence. So even if there are other bases which require U.S. Military intervention or U.S. military assistance or even U.S. military deterrence, we can do both. We have the world's largest military and the most military resources. we proved that Okinawa is a strategic location for deterrence, not only in our contention 1, but also in our contention 2. If there are other strategic locations, that's fine, but withdrawing from Okinawa, first, doesn't mean we're going to go to those other locations, and they don't prove that, but second, there's no reason why we can't be in both locations. Now, on to their contention 1 subpoint B, where they tell you that NATO is being attacked in Eastern Europe by Russia. Specifically, they say Latvia and Ukraine, specifically Crimea in Ukraine. First, I'd like to see their evidence on any sort of invasion against Latvia because, to the best of my knowledge, that has not occurred. But Ukraine specifically was invaded by Russia because it was not allied to the United States or NATO. It was not a part of that alliance. The important part of this in today's debate is they dropped in their rebuttal the lifeline card we read to you in the 2A, where we show you that the Okinawan military base, as per the Japanese Defense Ministry, is the lifeline of the alliance. Without the Okinawan military base, there is no alliance between the United States and Japan, which allows the situation which occurred in Ukraine to also happen between Japan and China. And that's exactly what we stop when you negate in today's round. But in addition, let's now move to their contention 2, where they talk about how Japan has the obligation to protect itself, but the United States does not. First, they tell you that Japan can't expect other countries to defend it. But we tell you the reason that we're in Okinawa and in the East China Sea is because that region controls half of all global trade. We're not just in there to protect our allies, and don't get me wrong, that's a very good reason why we would be there, but we're also there to protect our economic interests. So now, let's also move to the fact where they say that the United States can't afford to defend Japan. First, Japan pays 70% of all US military costs on the island of Okinawa. So what we can see with this is they're subsidizing the vast majority of these costs. If we move these troops to other locations, Japan isn't going to be paying for them, and there's no guarantee that other countries are going to be paying for them. In fact, the most cost-efficient thing to do is leave them there, because in addition, it would cost us $27 billion to withdraw our troops from the island of Okinawa. That's not even counting building bases somewhere else and relocating them. Now, under their contention, under 2B, they tell you that Japan can do more and that the troops in Okinawa are not there because of any offensive war planned. This is going to be really important to today's debate. First, the more that Japan can do is increase their nuclear proliferation. We read you evidence from 4 different professors and 2 security analysts from both Japan and the United States who tell you that when we withdraw our forces from Okinawa, the only way Japan can still deter China is through acquiring nuclear weaponry. I'm not going to re-give you those impacts, we tell you those in case. But in addition, they tell you that the forces are not there for any war planned. The whole reason they're there is to stop planned war. We show you that they deter Chinese aggression. Now, onto their contention 3. They tell you that bases take up valuable space which can be used for economic purposes in Okinawa. They never quantify the impact, first. But second, any US military base is going to take up land and cause economic harms. But in addition, Okinawa's economy, 5% of it is contributed by the US military bases. The two are very much intertwined. They also tell you that they lack access to natural resources. Those natural resources have already been used. Moving those bases means we use more natural resources somewhere else. And lastly, with their 3C, they tell you that we acquired the land unethically. War is unethical. Both Japan and the United States had a number of ethical violations, and we would have more if we caused war between Japan and China. Thank you, and vote nay. Oh, I'm used to being first speaker. This is the second speaker I've had in like 2 months. Sorry.
Are you ready for cross-ex?
Yeah, would you like the first question?
Oh, yeah, the judge ready first? Sure thing. Then we'll begin. So you basically argue the concept that Japan is basically subsidizing our military bases there.
Yes.
Who, I guess, in turn is fighting there? Who are the troops?
No one is fighting in Okinawa because we've deterred Chinese aggression.
Well, who exactly do we have there ready to fight if the time comes?
We have U.S. troops there. Marines, Air Force personnel, naval personnel.
So at the end of the day, who exactly is losing their family if a war were to occur?
Well, seeing as how no war has occurred and no war will occur when we stay there, no one's losing their family.
So no
May I
war
ask a
occurred.
question now?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. So you talk a lot about how the reason that Chinese aggression increased in both the Philippines and Vietnam was because when we pulled our military troops out of both of those areas, we relocated them to other bases in the region. Specifically, you said we put them in Okinawa.
I provided direct examples, for instance, when we moved.
Right. Do you have any evidence that we relocated Philippine troops or Vietnamese troops back to East Asia, to other areas in
We
East Asia?
basically have a direct example right now is when second we, remove these bases and replace them, we either build a new base or move them to an already
Did we
existing
put
base.
them in East Asia?
Well, if you look at Okinawa.
Do you have like we already had the base in Okinawa. We've had it since 1951. The Philippine withdrawal and the Vietnamese withdrawal all occurred far after that. So do you have a card or a source which says that we moved troops that were in Vietnam or troops that were in the Philippines to Okinawa?
We do have a source that specifically does say that.
May I see that, please?
Absolutely, but with the second, we did remove them from both Vietnam and Korea, and multiple other examples, such as the Philippines. The first place we put them was in Okinawa because at that time.
Yeah, I just want to see that evidence.
That's the tactics.
We can't debate that unless that point of evidence is
Sure.
really clear for us. Do you have a question for me?
Absolutely. You argue this concept of a Chinese threat. Why is the Chinese threat increasing?
Well, so the Chinese threat is increasing for a number of different reasons. First, we show you that they believe that the US military is going to pull out of Okinawa. Japan believes the same thing because we've threatened to do so. So Japan is increasing their military posturization to increase their chances of a successful invasion of Okinawa or the Senkaku
Why does
Islands.
the base
But in
leave-
addition, we show you in the contention 1A that
Hold on.
China has claimed areas in the South China
Why does
Sea
the
and the
base have
East
to be in
China Sea
Okinawa?
to
My question.
what?
Why does the base have to be in Okinawa and not say? such
We
as the
read
base
to
we have
you
10
in the
miles south
we
of
read to
Okinawa,
you in the
islands?
so there are no islands that are 10 miles south of
The
Okinawa.
Ryukyu Island chain is Okinawa.
The
all
Ryukyu
the
Island,
chain.
Okinawa is the biggest island on the Ryukyu Island chain.
So it's one of
But
the islands.
do you want me to answer your initial question, or do
Is
you want to move
Ryukyu-
on to this point?
Is Okinawa one of the islands in the Ryukyu Island chain?
It is one of those islands.
Why can't we put a military base 10 miles south?
Why would we spend $27 billion to move it and
Well,
use more
Japan's
natural
gonna subsidize
resources?
it, I thought.
What?
Japan subsidizes
Japan
it, I
wouldn't
thought.
subsidize Japan only subsidizes U.S. military bases in Okinawa. It doesn't subsidize them throughout all of Japan. But let's move on to the initial question that you asked. The reason Chinese aggression is increasing in the region, and their main motivation, is because their new claims in the South China Sea would give them control over 1/2 of all global trade and fully shut down the Japanese Navy and the Japanese Air Force.
So it hasn't happened yet, it's hypothetical. Why should we look to this
They've
hypothetical?
increased, so not
why
only are
should-
they building man-made islands,
So
which has happened
Ultimately,
in
if
the
I can ask you a question really fast, why should we rely on this hypothetical when we know for a fact, and I will provide you the evidence, of an attack on Latvia by Russia?
Oh yeah, I just want to see that evidence real quick.
Then we can pull that right from that. And that's by NATO itself as well. Oh, yeah, do you have a citation on that?
Oh, it's
Oh, gotcha.
Okay, gotcha. My bad.
Can we preserve the flag?
You guys taking a breath?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
2 minutes and 15 seconds.
Is everybody ready? Okay,
How
then,
much prep did you use real quick?
They use 45 seconds.
Okay, good.
now is everybody ready? Okay, I'll be going over my own case and moving on to my opponents if time remains. Okay, beginning with our contention 1, they said that Okinawa, well, we never proved that Okinawa is in a strategic placement, but again, we tell the Air Force Chief and General Staff Ronald Fulgerman, who admits that they serve no military function in Okinawa and they don't need to be there to meet any timeline in any war plan. Therefore, straightforward proving that it's not a pointless, and they said we can be in both locations. Well, the problem with this is why would we waste troops and put them in a pointless location when we can put them elsewhere that's going to be extremely more efficient? Moving on, they said, it was kind of more of off topic what we were trying to get to, but with our sub-point view, we're basically saying that forces need to be put somewhere that's more strategic and more efficient for these positions. And again, Okinawa, as we said, is pointless, and for us to waste troops in a place where it's not going to do the United States any benefit or Japan any benefit for those alliances is basically dropped. Moving on to our contention 2. Subpoint A, they said that 70% of the military is paid for and the region controls a large portion of trade. But again, like my partner stated, it's cheaper for us to do it domestically. Again, with the F-22 Raptor and the technology advances that we have, we can do just as much from the domestic point of view without wasting all of the money that it takes for us to have the military base of Okinawa. Moving on, subpoint B, and they were talking about when we withdraw. Again, Okinawa's, the military base, takes up 1/4 of their land and only produces 5% GDP. Those numbers don't match up equivalently and leaves only 75% of land left for them to produce the rest of their GDP. Moving on to the opponent's case. For their contention 1, again, China wouldn't be openly able to attack a place that's going to destroy all of their trade. And with that, even the Okinawans themselves argue against the fact that they don't want that military base there. And if they are going to do that, it's obviously not a strategic location like we've proved, and those forces can be used in a more needed area. Again, addressing our contention 1 subpoint B. Moving on to their contention 2. And they talk about how the base is becoming irrelevant and the expansion of Chinese is a very big threat, and again, that contention 1 addresses that.
No prep. Okay. All right, is anybody not ready for the concept? No? Sweet. All right, so as a brief roadmap, I'm just going to go straight down the concept of the flow. So first, they ask, why would China openly attack one of their trade partners? First, we can look to a historical example. When we look towards Central Europe right before World War I, they were the most economically dependent on each other, those countries were, than they have ever been historically. But they all went into a war because of diplomatic reasons. The similar diplomatic reasons to what the Chinese expansionism is causing in the South China Sea. Beyond that, too, even if you still believe that the economy is the main driving force between Chinese aggression, you're also going to look to the fact that we show you a card that says China could control 1/2 of all global trade if they took over Okinawa. This goes unrefuted on the flow. We're going to draw the line of abuse in this speech because we wouldn't have adequate time to respond to any arguments. We've given them plenty of chances. Let's go on to the second point. They say we can place troops anywhere. Again, we've permed this argument already. We can still place troops anywhere. Like, this is a chess game, right? But we have one square that we need to defend because we've seen China take over other squares that we've left open. So what we can do, we can still shift troops around, but we need to keep troops in Okinawa or else you see all of the harms that we read you in the con case. Let's move on to contention 2. They said, why would China need a nuke? Like, think about it. The United States is causing this. So first, the Japanese would need a nuke. We show you in case, and this goes unrefuted, that they only have 2 ways to deter Chinese aggression. 1 is with US presence, and 2 is with nuclear warheads. We show you that when the US leaves, that we're going to have this nuclear proliferation. Beyond that, they also dropped the lifeline argument, where we show you that the Okinawan base is the lifeline of the US-Japan alliance. And so if we drew out troops from Okinawa, then we would see that entire alliance crumble. This goes unrefuted, drawing the line of abuse on this again. They also talked to the fact, they said the head general says this isn't like they're not going to meet any war plan in any time frame. It's not a war plan, it's a deterrence plan. It's essentially a peace plan. We're showing you that US presence in Okinawa is what is deterring Chinese aggression in the region. If we leave, that they're going to take it over just like they did in the other islands. They also talk about Guam, Hawaii, and South Korea. You can perm those arguments, cross-apply that. They also say we should worry about Russia. They bring up the example of Latvia. We looked at the card. Latvia has not actually been attacked by Russia. The card said that Russia is close on their borders. An official attack hasn't actually happened. And the reason Ukraine was not defended is because they weren't allies, and I've already covered that. We need to look to the half of all trade card as well on a contention 2. So point B, thank you for your time. Richard Conn.
All right. So, you guys ready for process?
Yes.
Sure thing. Judge ready.
All right. Do you want the first question?
Sure thing. You heard of this concept of Chinese threat, and basically I want to get back to the real point. Why is the Chinese constantly expanding their military? Why do they feel the need to
Why are
constantly
they?
expand their military?
Why are they like expanding their military in the South China Sea?
China is expanding their military for economic reasons and diplomatic reasons.
Okay.
But we show you the economic reason is that they could control half of all global trade. And when the US leaves these places vacant, that China just fills in to fill that gap.
May we have a question? So I asked you in the last cross-examination, and I didn't get this evidence, and I'd like to ask you again. Do you have evidence which says that when we withdrew our troops from the Philippines or from Vietnam, we moved them to other bases in the region or moved them specifically to Okinawa, like you said?
I'll hold that up and then actually read the card directly to you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Do you have a question for us?
Okay, moving on. Can I see the card where you were saying that China can control half of the global trade, and basically when you're talking about we only have 1 square left to defend?
Yeah, of course.
So the 1 square left to defend, that was just him, just my partner.
That was me
What's the
using the
evidence
analogy.
behind that, like the grounds
Yeah.
for that statement?
Yeah.
And I'll pull up the half of trade card. While I'm looking for that, do you have another question for us?
Let me read off this card really fast. The key to regional defense lies in cooperation between powerful nations. Basically what it goes on to say is it brings up the example of Philippines, South Korea, and talked about how we remove military bases. And then directly said, basically,
Did those soldiers go to
permitted
Okinawa? Because that's what you
US
claimed.
presence in the area, and then strengthened its defense position by permitting offensive operations, and that's in the next area, which is Okinawa.
Does it say the next area is Okinawa?
Well, that's where it eventually moved to.
Does it
If you
say
want
the
to.
next area was Okinawa? Because
Do
they're
you
claiming
just
they moved
infer
there.
it, or is it like hard
I mean,
fact?
it doesn't specifically say Okinawa.
It doesn't
or- but
specify.
we do
That's
have
all we
other-
needed. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Now
I
let's
have a
read off the
question.
half of trade card for you. The Washington Post specifically says, the challenges including China's claims in the South China Sea, through which half the world's trade passes, and its exertions in the East China Sea, which would give Beijing the right to block Japanese boats and fighter planes from the region around Northeast Asia and China.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for you. So why should we stay in an area where we're wasting a bunch of money when we can do just as much domestically?
How much money are we spending in Okinawa?
Well, more than we would be spending
How
if we
much?
just stayed.
Give me a number, because I tell you, it would cost us $27 billion to withdraw.
Okay, he'll pull up that number for you, but then again, why can't we just do it domestically?
Because
why should we send troops over?
Domestically, we have to pay for 100% of all the troops that we station in a U.S. base.
We also read you in card that is a key strategic point. That's the Jenny Lin card from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. That's also gone unrefuted on the flow today.
Right,
Okay,
but
but
don't
why can't we
forget that in Okinawa, Japan pays for 70% of the costs.
I'll
If
actually
we come to
address
the
that right
United
now.
States, what?
When was that card written?
I'm not sure.
Because we have a card from just
But
last
we're
year.
still waiting for the
We have
card
a
we
card
just
from
asked.
just last year that says Japan's only covering 20% of the cost. What happened there?
Regardless, 20% versus 100%, like we're still gonna be saving money. But again, tell me how much money we're spending in Okinawa, because you said you had the evidence.
Sure thing. $2 billion.
A year?
The cost is estimated at $2 billion. That's non-personal costs. And recently, Japan only contributed about $200 million.
Okay, can we just get that card?
We'll use prep time then, please.
1 minute and 15 seconds remaining.
How much time do we have left?
Yeah, that was fine.
All right. As brief off time, we're mostly going over, I guess, crystallization and overall voters. Are Teshrit?
Absolutely.
Votes? And pardon? Then I will begin. So very first and foremost, we need to address the fact of basically who exactly should we listen to when it comes to military strategy. And I would personally argue that the best person to listen to would be not only the defense, I guess, Department of Defense, not only for the United States, but as well as Okinawa and Japan, which all collectively agree that Okinawa certainly now serves absolutely no purpose, and that there are other better locations for us to put bases such as mainland Japan. Ultimately, throughout this entire round, my opponent still failed to provide a reasoning as to why we need it in Okinawa, but not anywhere else. What exactly is the essential advantage of having it in Okinawa besides upsetting an entire population? The only real advantage they covered is the concept of, well, they're paying for it. Well, they'll also pay for it in Japan, just like they are with the bases that we already have there. We should expand those bases because those are not only closer, but more strategic, and ultimately Okinawa got left behind. The only reason why we had that back during World War II era was because, once again, we were doing island hopping tactics. Those tactics no longer exist with the advancement of modern technology, and there's a better alternative to it, leading us to impacts. Ultimately, it really does come down to two big threats. The real biggest impact they provided is the concept of the Chinese threat. But I want you to ask yourself right now, who exactly has massively expanded their military over the past few years? Who exactly already has access to countless nukes? Who exactly is already killing countless people? Who exactly is already expanding their, group? And what nation on the planet already has sanctions against it besides Russia? And our opponents are going to argue this concept of, well, look to Latvia. They didn't really conquer it. They're only at the borders of it. However, if I read you the direct card, they actually did attack it. They didn't conquer it because just in time NATO somehow managed to get in there. But they actually did lead to massive casualties, and had we had a military base or other military force there to stop an impending Russia, we could have done better. But the difference between Russia and China is China is the only reason for expanding their military empire is simply due to a response to exactly what we're doing, which leads me to the third voter overall. Basically, you have to ask yourself, why exactly are we playing this chess game in the first place? We control the world's economy as it is. We control China's economy. And I want you to bring up that example again. If 70% of China's GDP is directly reliant on the United States, why don't we take an economic route instead of a military route? We know a military route ends up leading to lives lost. But if we're going to take the military route, Japan should be the one losing their lives, not our children here who volunteer for war. Thank you.
All right. I think we have all 2 minutes. Okay. We're going to just take some breath.
Sorry.
Are our judges ready? Opponents, partner, and my audience. All right, then let's begin by going straight voters, or not straight voters. The first thing I'd like to provide is a point of clarification. Let's talk about Latvia for a second. They said there was evidence that there were casualties of Russian invasion of Latvia. The evidence that we got, and we asked for evidence of a Russian invasion of Latvia. The evidence we got said Russian troops are on the border. It never once spoke of casualties. That's why they haven't given you a number. And even if they do want to provide that evidence to you after the round, we didn't get it, so we can't debate that. We debated on the evidence that we were presented. But in addition, now let's go voters. Voter number one is going to be the preservation of the alliance. We gave them the opportunity to respond to this in the rebuttal. We gave them the opportunity to respond to this in cross-examination. And we gave them the opportunity to respond to it in the summary. But they used none of those opportunities. They've dropped the fact that if the Okinawan military base goes away, the alliance between the United States and Japan goes away. That's what you're going to be voting on. The Japanese Defense Ministry themselves said that the Okinawan military base was the lifeline for the security alliance. So without that base, we lose the alliance, and in fact, we're going to address why this is so impactful on the flow here in a second. Voter number 2 is going to be deterrence. Every time that we've withdrawn from a location, China has taken that location. It happened in the Philippines, and it happened in Vietnam. Our opponent said that the only reason this occurred was because we moved those troops to Okinawa. They never gave us evidence for that. They can't prove that. And in fact, that's a baseless claim. But in addition, we read you 4 professors and 2 national security experts who tell you that when we withdraw from Japan, the only way Japan can deter this aggression from China is through nuclear proliferation. They said no country wants to start a Cold War with a country that's allied with the United States. But we tell you in the first voter, as well as in the second contention, that that alliance goes away, meaning there is no Cold War between a nuclear power and a nuclear power. It's between a nuclear power and a non-nuclear power, which is exactly why nuclear proliferation happens. China gets nukes, South Korea gets nukes, Japan gets nukes, and North Korea increases their nuclear presence. And the last voter is that even if you buy everything they've claimed about strategic locations everywhere else, we can do more than one thing with our military. So for these reasons, I'm going to ask that you vote nay today, and I thank my opponents for a wonderful round.